intensity control for me was so key to my development, because I think I was always overtraining, or the intensity was always too high, that all I was doing was pushing the ceiling of my VO2 anaerobic capacity, which was already great. But then all it was doing was reducing my aerobic capacity and my levels. So my anaerobic was here, my aerobic was here. So I had such good speed and I looked like a very, very fast athlete, and I could do a great 5K or great sessions. But when it came to doing a triathlon that was always over an hour long, or even an Olympic distance was 2 hours, I had nothing to help me get through that length of race.
Hi guys, so week 2 on YouTube, and what I've learned this week is what YouTube really likes is make sure your podcast starts with something interesting. So instead of talking about me and Grant and faffing around with what we've been up to the last 2 weeks, we go straight introducing today's guest, which is Cameron Main, joining us from Lanzarote in the sunshine, and we'll deep dive into his life as a professional and everything he can bring to the podcast today. Welcome to the show, Cam.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys, for having me on. I really appreciate you asking me to join the podcast. I'm excited to chat to you both about lots of stuff to do with triathlon.
You were trying to see how many Scots we can get on the podcast in one time. So it's going well so
Yeah,
far,
well,
isn't it, Grant?
yeah, doing very well.
See
Yes.
Cameron.
Just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, Cam. You're sort of, I think in a lot of age group circles, there's a definite big following of like 70.3 and Ironman. Maybe over the short course stuff these days. And a lot of that's down to marketing and the commercial aspect of it. So, but yeah, just give us a little bit of your background on you, who you are. So, any of the listeners that maybe don't follow the sport, over the last year or two are up to speed.
Yeah, so I suppose try and keep it as brief as possible. So I'm, Scottish professional triathlete. I'm 26 years old now, and before I started doing the long course stuff, which has only been in the last 12 months, I used to be very involved in all the short course, sprint, Olympic side, and started triathlon back in 2012 when I was only 12 years old, and quickly progressed, got very addicted to the sport, as I think every person that does triathlon, does get really into the sport very quickly, and progressed, quite fast through the youth and junior ranks, and got into the Triathlon Scotland team and started really enjoying the sport. And then, a huge goal of mine was to, qualify for the Commonwealth Games, which my big goal was Birmingham 2022, because I thought that was a realistic target given my age. And, having Mark and Grant in the centre when I was only a young 15-year-old kid was pretty cool to look up to them and train with those guys, and, a few other guys in the Stirling Centre. So that was kind of where my triathlon career started. And then, went to the Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games with Grant, which was pretty awesome, representing Team Scotland. And that was really cool, one of the highlights of my triathlon career so far. And then continued to progress, doing World Cups, representing Great Britain, and, doing quite well at European Cups, and got a win at European Cup and a couple top 5s, top 7s at World Cups. For me, I was loving the sport, 22 to 24, and had a big goal to try and go to the LA Olympics. But for me, I did 170.3, and that was when everything really changed in my triathlon career. It wasn't that I totally fell out of the love of the short course stuff. It just really opened my eyes to a whole new experience. The marketing, sponsors, there was so much positive energy coming from doing a 70.3, and it really motivated me. And to be honest, at the end of 2024, when I did my first one over in Western Australia and it went quite well, I thought, I think I need to go down this route and change from doing short course, which I've always known, to doing some more 70.3 Ironman events. And since then, since the end of 2024, and last year has been amazing. It's changed my whole career. It's changed my outlook on triathlon, and I'm probably in the best place I've been in terms of mentally enjoying the sport and physically having a good time. The body's healthy and all that kind of things. Yeah, that's kind of very quick summary of my triathlon journey and the direction I've taken recently. But like the last year has been great for me in the sport. I've had some good results. I've won an Ironman 70.3. I've won an Ironman, my debut Ironman over in Western Australia as well. And now really happy to be on such a great team, the Bianchi Pro Triathlon team as well, which has been recently announced. So it's been, really cool, kind of a crazy 12 months. A lot's changed in my life as well, but I'm loving the sport. And the Ironman stuff for me is definitely the direction I'm going to continue, because it's been great fun and a good challenge as well, which I think we all need to.
Nice one. That was a long whistle stop tour for probably quite a long a long career
A lot to break
so
down
far.
probably in there as well.
Yeah, so let's slow it down and go through that a little bit then. So I remember you first being made aware of you, as you said, coming to the Stirling Centre. I was a little bit older than yourself, who was this young up and coming athlete, super enthusiastic, absolutely loved the sport, wanted to learn, wanted to get fast. It was already pretty fast. Um, what was the why did you do your first triathlon? Why did you start in the sport at the very beginning?
So before triathlon, I did martial arts. So I did Taekwondo from 6 till 12 years old. And I got my black belt eventually, which was an amazing achievement. But when I was like 10, I kind of started to fall out of love of doing martial arts. For me, it was kind of a different vibe of what I was looking for. You know, I loved the discipline and I loved the sport, but I think I just needed something that was really physically hard, like something that really pushed you to the, you know, physically and mentally. So once I got my black belt in Taekwondo, my dad was doing a lot of triathlon at the time. And I used to go and watch him doing these events, you know, all over Scotland, the series, the Aberdeenshire series up in the north of Scotland. And I thought it was pretty cool. And as soon as I quit martial arts, I just decided that I wanted to give triathlon a go. I just wanted to do what my dad was doing. And he entered me into a youth, or it was like TriStar 3 race, I think it was called, the very youngsters before youth. You know, he entered me into the same race that he was doing. So I raced in the morning and he raced in the afternoon. And it was actually in East Fife, was my first ever triathlon. And I just wanted to just do something that I wasn't very good at, something that was completely new, quite cool. You know, as a young person back in 2012, you're like, oh, swim, bike, run. This is what is triathlon. This is kind of cool. And also with the Olympics happening that year, there was so much, you know, increase in exposure around Alistair and Johnny, you know, the Olympics in London, everything. So it was like, for me, it was that whole, I was very much influenced by that as well. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of get involved in this cool sport that I didn't really know much about, that wasn't very big at the time. But obviously since then, it's kind of exploded really, which is really cool to see.
Did you win that first triathlon?
I did not. I think I was second last.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
I was terrible. No, it's yeah, to give people some understanding, this is always a funny story and I love telling it when people don't know, but because my swimming now is at quite a good level, you know, I can, especially in Ironman 70.3 and Ironman races, I can make the front pack. I've led out the swims a couple times last year and my swimming is in a good place. But when I first started the sport back in 2012, it was a 400-meter swim, and you need to put down your time, like so that they can seed you and put you in lanes and stuff when it's in the pool. And me and my dad, when we entered, we put down 16 minutes, which is not very fast for a professional athlete or someone that's trying to be pro, or even a young quick swimmer. Like that's like, you know, 1 minute per 25 is not quick. And I ended up swimming like 8 or 9 minutes, but that was kind of where I started. And then I was on my dad's mountain bike. I think I threw up as I mounted my bike, all the sweeties and jelly babies that had been fed beforehand. And then I ran pretty bad. I was just jogging around the, whatever it was, maybe 2K run. So I was like second last. I don't think I was.
It's pretty inspiring that. I mean, I think a lot of people with swimming, you know, probably look at where they're at and see, you know, I mean, what would you swim 400 in now?
4 minutes and 12 seconds is my PB, so it's a
Exactly. I
lot
mean, you
faster.
know, yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, most people would just, I think they look at swimming and think, they might not admit it, but they probably think improving in swimming is near impossible as an age
Mm.
as an adult onset swimmer, as an age grouper. But we're going to come on to that later in the podcast. I think you can probably shed some pretty good light on, you know, how you made that development and how that might
Yeah, for
apply to
sure.
age groupers. So Grant, did you win your first triathlon?
Yes. which why I was kind of expecting that answer, because it's such a common answer that, you know, a talented athlete, somebody that goes on to become a professional, does their first one and they win it. So they think, oh, this is awesome, I'll continue. You very rarely get the answer, oh, I came last and I loved it. So I wanted to do more.
I think that was I think that for me was like, it's quite a unique and maybe different thing that a lot of other athletes or professionals have experienced because yeah, I wasn't very talented really. I had to work extremely hard to get to where I've got to. And when I joined the Triathlon Scotland squad as a youth, I was like the worst in the squad. I really was. I remember speaking to Blair, I think it was Blair Cartmel at the time, who was like the performance coach and looking after a lot of the younger guys. And I remember having a chat with him, maybe, or a couple others. And the email I got was like, you're good and you're on the squad, but you need to really, really improve this, and this. And you're kind of we're giving you a chance. And I was like, oh, I've just got on there basically. So I was definitely not that talented and I wasn't really good, but that was what I think really drove me to improve and train hard because I just, I didn't have it easy. I wasn't like winning things and it was good fun. It was like hard work and I was really bad. But that's, I think, what now helps me now that I'm older because I've had to work hard and I still want to work hard. I've never really had it that easy, but that's what's always motivated me. But yeah, definitely didn't win my first one, so it wasn't as nice as your first one for sure, Grant.
Um, with that, then, you obviously, like every athlete, goes through a lot of hardship, and it sounds as if the mentality that you brought into the sport from a really, really young age has kind of carried you through really well. One of the things that I kind of remember following your career all the way through, particularly in the early years, was you were always injured. There was always
Yeah,
niggles, there was
crazy.
always something to try and get through. Is that something that you've managed to kind of overcome and get consistency towards?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's something that I think from the age of 16 to 20 was like just constant sore foot, sore knee, something, sore shins. Like it was really, really difficult. And I still, to be honest, it's something I struggle with. I don't know if it's to do with my body, weakness. I'm very hypermobile, and a lot of people that are hypermobile struggle with controlling what their body's doing. And then, there's a lot of movement. And when you've got a lot of movement, that's not always good for controlling a 15-hour bike and swimming. There's a lot of stuff to try and deal with and a lot of tendons going in the wrong place. So I've definitely got more control of it now. I'm older and I'm a bit more robust. But even looking at last year, obviously I changed sport a little bit, going from the short course to the long course. You're riding on a time trial bike. You're training a bit differently. There's a bit more volume involved, potentially slightly less intensity. And I really struggled with shin pain the whole of last summer. So I would like to say I have got on top of the injury problem, but to be honest, not really, because it's still something I'm working through. There's always little niggles. I think as a pro athlete, you've always got something that's maybe not feeling quite right. But for me, I've definitely been that athlete that's always had maybe something else that's really stopped me from training as hard as I'd want to. And I think that definitely impacted my junior career. I never made a junior team, like a British team. I never went to European or world champs as a junior. I never really got close, to be honest, because I was always, impacted by injuries, and it really did affect me mentally as well. Because you're like, oh, I'm not able to train and stuff. So it's something that I just had to deal with and learn that maybe me and my body are going to just struggle sometimes with training load, and that has to be managed very, very carefully. And it's still something I'm having to manage very, very carefully. But I think the older you get, the easier it gets to, manage those injuries and reduce the chance because you're a bit more mature. You maybe don't do silly things that you would do when you're younger, and you're just a bit stronger as well. But yeah, definitely still working through some things always, for sure.
So relating this to like the listeners, thinking about current conversations I hear amongst our athletes, some of the mindset around like dealing with injuries, which people are having to deal with all the time, and I think one of the key things you say there is the older you get, but that's actually also the more experienced I'm in the sport, the more I learn that things will be okay and I will get back to training and stuff. But like how do you deal with injuries, maybe on a mental level or maybe actually in your earlier years? I'm trying to relate this to people maybe, 2 or 3
Mm.
years into their journey now who maybe push through stuff they shouldn't, maybe aren't getting the right treatment at the right time because they don't have that circle of people around them to know where to go to get the right advice, etc. If you could go back in time, what would you do differently or how would you handle it differently mentally?
Yeah, I'd say I was quite good at seeing physio, doing strength exercises because I had quite a lot of support through Triathlon Scotland. But I suppose for someone that maybe doesn't feel like they've got that support, it is really important to have a team around you to understand, first of all, what are you dealing with? Like, is it something that's severe? Is it something that's not severe that you can still train through? So I think getting that initial advice to understand what is actually happening, because as an athlete, you want to train through the pain, you want to keep pushing, but a lot of the time, especially when you're younger and you're a youth or a junior, you've got so many years ahead of you. So I think taking a step back and really seeing someone, getting advice and giving your body the time to either grow or get over the injury and have those changes is totally normal. And I think something that I should have probably done better is maybe not train through as many of the injuries I trained through, because they just lasted so much longer than they needed to. But I was always so, like, I thought the importance of my youth and junior career was everything. If I didn't make this European team or I didn't win this British race in June, that's it. My career's finished. Who am I? I'm nobody. I'm not winning this race. I need to train. But really, I think when you're younger, it's so important, even as a 17, 18-year-old, to just enjoy the sport, but be as healthy as you can and make smart decisions with, the best team you can around you. And just remember that you've got so many years potentially ahead of you. So just look after your body, because you only get one body, and if you really push it too far, I've seen a lot of people that have struggled to, get past their 20s in the sport, and I'm kind of lucky that I'm still able to do the sport the way I am, because I probably pushed my body a bit too much sometimes through injuries, and I'm just glad that it's still in one piece just now. But yeah, I think any advice is just look after your body and remember that missing a week of training on the grand scheme of things, in a year is really nothing. There's professional athletes out here that are taking 3 months out of the sport because of a stress fracture, and then they're still winning races at the end of the year. So you can have a week off and recover properly, look after your body, be healthy, to give it the time it needs, and then you're back up and running in a couple weeks, 3 weeks. And guess what? If you've got a race 3 months down the line, you're going to still be flying. So, but it's so hard in that moment as any athlete to understand that's okay. And I have been there, and I'm like, I can't miss this run session. I'm not even going to miss one rep, because if I miss one rep, then that's going to detriment my whole performance for this race in 5 weeks' time. But it's just, we get so worked up about having to tick off absolutely everything. And it is really, really hard in those moments to take a step back and go, it's okay to miss this. And it absolutely is. And I think that's when, yeah, that's the difference between making smart decisions and really bad ones that can actually just make things so much worse. And as a young athlete, it's impossible, I think, to control a 16-year-old and tell them, no, don't do that session. You're just going to do it, and that's the hardest thing, I think, as a younger person, definitely.
Yeah, I think time in the sport really helps people. The benefit of hindsight. We always say to athletes, the next race is just the next race, because when you look back on it from 20 odd years of racing, they were all just the next race, and or the next week or the next training session. Yeah, no, that's great advice. Grant, were you going to jump in there?
Yeah, I'm just going to say it's one of those things. An athlete's greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. That ability to push that extra rep, that ability to keep on going when it hurts, makes it a hell of a lot more challenging to also stop when you need to stop, right? When those signals are telling you that something isn't quite right.
Sorry, can I just go slight sideline there? Just
Go
thinking
for it.
about conversation with a few athletes this week. Do you think, I mean, well, question one, how much time a year do you take away from the sport in terms of off season? And then following on from that, as you look at what the typical age grouper is doing to themselves, because I think modern social media, etc., just makes Ironman, I'm doing an Ironman, it's normal, I'll be back training by next weekend kind of, attitude. And they get to the end of a long, hard season, and then there's off-season run races and high rocks and everything else they're throwing in the mix. And where's the downtime? And my personal view is I see people come unstuck with it, and that could lead to injury or burnout or whatever it is. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, for me, I coach a few athletes, and the hardest thing is getting athletes to take 2 weeks off or good off-season downtime. I think as a professional athlete, when we're training 30 plus hours a week, a lot of people by the time they get to their last race, they cannot wait to have like 2 or 3 weeks off. It's like, oh my God, I can't wait to be a normal person and just chill, maybe do a couple easy runs and relax. Whereas I suppose when maybe say, for example, someone who's not a professional athlete or an age grouper who's balancing work, family, and they're training maybe 10 to 15 hours and it's slightly more manageable, they maybe get to their last race and they go, I feel okay. I don't want to have time off. Why would I have time off? I'm feeling fine. It's totally manageable. It's all good. But that like 2 weeks at least of like downtime with maybe a couple of sessions, like an easy swim, or you go open water, or you do an easy walk, like a hike or a run, just to give your mind and your body time to really just deload is so important because training is intense no matter how many hours you're training, because your body can only deal with so much stress in a day, whether it's looking after your kids, whether it's going to work, studying, you've got a meeting, little things, training, like all of this, your body can only deal with so much. And I think even if you're someone that feels like I only train 10 hours, it's totally manageable, I don't need 2 weeks off, you probably are going to regret that in 4 weeks time when it's January and you've not given yourself the 2 weeks off. And then you go, oh, I'm tired, or oh, my calf is sore, or my Achilles is sore now, I can't do this for a session. And if you had just given yourself the time to just really reset and then come back stronger and really get into training feeling good, it makes such a big difference for like consistency in training. And yeah, it's definitely a hard thing sometimes to get people to take that time off. But for me personally, I love it because it's, like I said, as a professional athlete, all my time and every day is, swim, bike, run, eating, sleeping, just triathlon, thinking about the sessions. So to have 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks, even sometimes of just a chilled time, like a month in the year where you don't have to really, stress about training, or it's not intense. You can go and maybe go on a little holiday or do stuff with the family, or just chill a little bit, watch some Netflix, not feel like you've got to go and do a huge run or bike session, I think is really nice as, someone that's involved in it quite a lot. So yeah, it's very important in my opinion, definitely.
How has that changed throughout your career? Has it changed throughout your career? You mentioned 2 weeks, which is kind of like given just what everybody's told as a youngster, take 2 weeks off at the end of the
Yeah.
season. Has that changed at all throughout your career? Got longer, got less? How's that evolved?
Not really, to be honest, which is a good question. I've never really thought about it since I was like 12, 13. It's always been, yeah, you got 2 weeks off and then you get back into it. And so it's something I've always really done. But I think the older I've got, it's probably got a bit more specific. So, for example, I take 2 weeks off swimming, biking for me, like almost fully 2 weeks. Maybe towards the back end of that second week, I chuck in a swim and a ride just to kind of, for a bit of fun and enjoyment, really, like not really class it as training. But because I'm someone that gets injured so much with the running, and I also just love running, I do keep 2 to 3 runs in basically every week throughout the whole year. Just to load tendons, muscles, during my off season, because I found that if I was to take 2 weeks completely off, so if my Strava looks 0K for 2 weeks, and then I jump up to even 30 or 40K, which is only a few 45-minute runs, I might get injured. It's quite, my body is so reactive to just that jump from 2 weeks of nothing to then 1 week of 40K. So everyone's individual, and that's how I've kind of developed my off season to be a bit more specific, to kind of just help me as an athlete when I get back into training, that I don't get injured. And then also, even like the third or fourth week is still easier, whereas maybe when I was younger, it'd be like 2 weeks completely off, third week, bang, straight into 20 hours, 25, and that's when everyone gets injured. And that's kind of what always happens. And sometimes when you're in a center, it's difficult because you just go, okay, this is my 2 weeks off, I do whatever I want, I don't train, and then you come back into the center, and then it's like you're training with people that have maybe been back for 2 or 3 weeks, and that's when everyone kind of isn't able to do their own thing, and they get a bit carried away and pick up things. But when you're training like I am now, pretty much on my own, I obviously train with Sophia, my fiance, and we do stuff together, but a lot of my training and sessions are on my own. And so I can just do what I want and what feels right. I'm not ever chasing someone. I'm not ever riding too hard or getting carried away. I can really keep things controlled, which I think is also very important, but hard to do if you're someone or even an age group or someone that trains with a group, you're going to a swim club or you're going to a run club and you always want to chase those people. And it's difficult to keep things controlled for sure when you're starting back up. But it is important as well.
Just bringing that back then, you mentioned you used to train with a few groups. One of those groups that you did train with was down in Loughborough, which is one of the Olympic training centres for triathlon, and you trained with the likes of Alex Yee, Sophie Caldwell, Cassandre Beaugrand. How was that experience? You were there for a good few years. What did you learn from the likes of these guys in the short course world?
Yeah, so I was in Loughborough. Well, I'm still living in Loughborough, but I was in the performance centre in Loughborough with British Triathlon from 2021 to start of 2025 actually. So it was a good few years, over 3 years really, that I was based there in the centre, and I learned so much, to be honest, from seeing what Alex, Cassandra, Sophie all do on a daily basis, how they train, their mindset, their professionalism, but also how relaxed they are as well and how they just enjoy it. It's their full-time job and it's really intense, and they're some of the best athletes in the world. I mean, Cassandra and Alex are the current Olympic champions, so they are the best at the sport. They won that every, the event that's every 4 years, their class is the best in the world, and they do it intensely, but they also just love their job and they don't overthink it. And I think for me that was quite eye-opening, that someone that coming from Stirling and still quite a young athlete, everything I felt had to be perfect, or you must do this, you must do that, and you can't miss this session. But then sometimes when I would see the way Alex trains, he's obviously absolutely 100% focused, but if he needed to miss a session because his body wasn't quite right, or he didn't feel like the session was going to be worth it because of maybe stress or other things he had going on in his life, it was just like, it's okay. Like, I'm not going to do that session. And I suppose that's when it comes back to professionalism and experience and maturity and understanding. Your role within triathlon, whether it's your job or whether you're just doing it for fun, all of that's very important. And then more kind of outside of like training with Alex and Cassandra, like from a training perspective, one of the main things I learned being in the coaching environment in Loughborough was around like threshold zones, and I didn't even know what LT1 was or LT2 was before I actually moved to Loughborough, which is kind of crazy because I was in a centre before down in Stirling with you, Grant, but it wasn't really something that was spoke about much or really used much, really specifically. And when I went to Loughborough, it was basically everything. It was just, that is everything that they used, everything that the whole structure of the training program was built around, an LT2 bike session, LT2 run session, LT1 run session, LT2 bike session. Swimming in the pool, we're doing LT2, like this is kind of LT1 swim session, VO2, all of that was very well thought around. Doing time trials, testing in the lab. This is your specific heart rate, this is your power, this is where you should be training. And I'd never really used that. It was just like, we're going to do 5 by 4 minutes on the run hard, and I didn't know really what I was working in. It was just hard, and it got me very fit. But for me, like, it was quite, again, eye-opening to the real professionalism and specific intensity that everyone was training to. And I think that's why everyone in Loughborough really, trains to and performs to a high level, like Alex and Cass, because the program is well thought out and everyone trains to the right zones. It comes back to when I was saying, you shouldn't always be chasing people. Like, as much as training should be fun and you want to be running after your training partner that you want to try and beat, at the same time, when you're trying to be really professional and improve to the best of your ability, it's actually sometimes about training a bit easier and just to your zone and your threshold, because that's where you're at that moment in time. There's no point in me going and running 5 by 4 minutes with Alex, because he'll be working in his zone, getting what he needs, and I'll be working way, way over and actually not get what I need from it at all, even though I'll feel great and I'll be like, oh yeah, I can run with Alex. That's not true, because when it comes to a run off the bike, I'm not going to be anywhere near him. So it's about really understanding your zones, and that was one thing that was a huge change going from Stirling to Loughborough, was just the thought process behind why you were training and why the intensity that you were training in as well.
I mean, this is trickling into more and more into age group coaching now as well. LT1, LT2, VO2. Even like more advanced testing is easily available. We use some stuff with our
Yeah.
athletes. You understand they understand proper intensity control, relationship of those thresholds to VO2, and just generally a higher understanding of training. And you see it across professional and age group racing. Things are getting faster, people are getting fitter, and like the interesting bit that you sort of mentioned there is that, I guess in a way, the intensity comes down a little bit when you understand control properly. It's not to say that you're not doing hard things. It's just that maybe hard is slightly different, and you can maybe do a bit more of it because it's done in a controlled manner. So yeah. Yeah, very interesting. So like talking about training, and I know you've spoken in the past about your physiology and stuff, and you produce quite high lactate levels, especially coming from a short course background. And I think an interesting thing to talk about here, especially because of some of the conversations we have on the podcast, really, in terms of intensity control and specifics for middle and long distance racing, is how you sort of transition from one sport to the other as someone that does sort of produce quite high lactate levels. I did hear it on a podcast actually once, you over 20 millimoles or something, I think.
Yeah, so you might have been doing this session as well, Grant. I can't remember, but it was a classic Sterling session we do quite a lot, was 6x100 off for 6 minutes. So it was basically trying to swim your PB for the first 100 in the pool. So I would try and go like a 55, 56. It was absolutely flat out. And then you had to try and do that 5 more times and try and hold the same pace off of 6 minutes. And I remember, I think the physiologist that was doing the lactate reading after the third or fourth one, I'd hit like 21, and she thought it must have been broken or wasn't right. But I can tell you, I had to go to the toilet like with my feet up on the toilet, like could hardly even like stand. I felt so sick. Like it was crazy. I don't know how I ever survived through these kind of sessions, but I genuinely was able to push myself like beyond, yeah, like a level most people could really reach. Because I mean, if anyone's done lactate testing and they've had like 10 or 8 or 12, it's pretty horrendous. So 21 was like, it was poison. I was basically poisoning my body. The toxicity of my blood level and stuff was crazy. But yeah, that was the kind of level I could push myself. But that was also the problem with short course racing, because I could probably get to the first buoy first if I really wanted to in most races. But then I'd have to stop at the first buoy. My race was done 2 minutes into the race. I could stop there. I'd be maxed out. There'd be not much more I could do, but I could get there first. But then I couldn't do anything else after that. And that was something that really was the story of my short course triathlon career, to be honest, and something I really had to work on a lot, and actually improved a lot when I went to Loughborough, because the intensity control for me was so key to my development, because I think I was always overtraining, or the intensity was always too high, that all I was doing was pushing the ceiling of my VO2 anaerobic capacity, which was already great. But then all it was doing was reducing my aerobic capacity and my levels. So my anaerobic was here, my aerobic was here. So I had such good speed and I looked like a very, very fast athlete, and I could do a great 5K or great sessions. But when it came to doing a triathlon that was always over an hour long, or even an Olympic distance was 2 hours, I had nothing to help me get through that length of race. And when you're trying to run a 10K off the bike after an hour and a half of racing, it was always very, very challenging. So I suppose, how have I managed to do an Ironman 70.3 in Ironman? People are probably thinking, how does that even work? But my theory behind it is, and something I always thought, maybe that, looking at an Ironman, I was like, that could actually be good for me, because I'm never going to have to work above like LT1, which is your lower aerobic threshold, really, for such a long race. So I think that is what's helped me transition quite easily, is I can work at such a high level or high percentage of my VO2 max. But when I control things and when I don't allow my lactate to go up high, so, if I can swim controlled and I can, sit at my LT1/LT2 in the bike, my lactate's never really getting out of control. And for me, you know, a lactate of 4 to 6 is pretty comfortable. It doesn't really feel that bad, whereas some people would go, that's my max. But for me, it's not too bad. So like doing an Ironman 70.3 and an Ironman, for me, the race is much more stable. And that's why I think I've had quite good success quite early on last year when I've done a few races, because I'm never having to work to a very high VO2 capacity. And that's why I think people, it's always interesting because everyone's different, but someone like Alex, having trained with Alex, I know he's always struggled with a little bit of his VO2, but he's very, very aerobically robust. Like his LT1 is like 20k an hour and his LT2 is like maybe 21 and a half. So they're really close, but his lower aerobic thresholds are so, so high, which I think is why whenever he's having to go max in an Olympic or a sprint race, it's not really costing him that much and he can recover really quick. Whereas for someone like me, when I'm having to attack on the bike or close a gap, I'm having to give everything and that's me, done. I've used everything that I've got. So whereas you don't have to do that in an Ironman or an Ironman 70.3, and that's how I think I've managed to make this transition between the two sports quite quickly and quite easily as well, because I can just keep things much more controlled in the longer races.
You know, firstly, that's absolutely amazing that it took the people around you to so long to work that out, right?
I know, yeah, it's true.
It must be a little bit frustrating, I'm sure, but you know, you've came on so much, and certainly the past couple of years, and really kind of come into your own. And in the long course world, middle distance and long course racing, how has your training changed over the past 2-3 years since you've stepped up?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose we could break it down into sports really to make it quite clear. Like overall volume is quite the same. Like I was always training between 28 to 30 hours and it's still, you know, 28 to 30 hours. But the structure of that is slightly less swimming because for me, you know, short course racing is very, very key. The swim is so important. So I was always swimming around 6 times a week, 5 to 6 times a week as a short course athlete, because if you miss the front group in short course, a lot of the time, your race is going to be very challenging point on. So making the front group was always key. So swimming was a focus. Now it's only 4 times a week. So I've reduced my swimming by 1 or 2 sessions, but those sessions are much more strength focused, maybe slightly longer at times, slightly longer main sets. So I might do like a 3 to 4k threshold set, but it's maybe 1 to 2 seconds per 100 slower so that I can do the 4k. So I'm more focusing on aerobic strength and capacity rather than really high-end VO2 or high threshold stuff for a shorter period of time, which is obviously very important for a 750 swim or a 1500 meter swim. So slightly less swimming, but just slightly more volume strength focused for me, which is just what you need for an Ironman because the swim's much longer and you swim at much less intensity. So it's quite self-explanatory from that perspective. And then I suppose similar with the biking, when I was in Loughborough, we only really did 1 bike session a week, which might be quite surprising to some people. And to me now looking back on it, it's kind of crazy, really, to be totally honest, because the biking in short course is still so important. And if you can't ride your bike, you're never going to run well off. And it's got, you know, so more important. You know, you look at like Wollongong, breakaway. Most races are breakaways. The bikes are getting harder. Carlo Vivari was chucked into the World Series last year. The bike courses are getting crazy tough. And everyone is super strong. And I think doing 1 bike session a week is just not enough. And I think my cycling capacity did go down, even though my swimming and running was very good. So my biking program has changed completely. I'm now working with Bex Milnes and I'm doing 2 really key bike sessions a week, very specific, very hard. You know, one of them is slightly more threshold focused. It depends because it changes throughout the year. But say, for example, just now I'm doing one that's quite VO2, you know, 2 to 4 minutes, quite hard, maybe 40 to 50 minutes of work. It's a lot and it's very intense, but I'm trying to raise that VO2 ceiling. And then maybe another bike session might be a bit more LT1, LT2 focused. So maybe like over unders. So 2 minutes LT2, 2 minutes LT1 for like an hour and a half plus. So very long. But again, it comes back to trying to develop the strength rather than maybe when I was doing short course, we'd do 4 or 5 by 10 minutes really hard. And that was the 1 bike session a week. So it would be really, really intense, but there wouldn't be much volume of intensity, whereas I'm doing a lot more volume of intensity, but it's more controlled in a way. And ride time's gone up quite a lot. So maybe before I was only doing 12, now I'm doing like definitely over 15, 16 hours most weeks when I'm in big blocks. And that's just because the cycling, especially now it's 20 meters, the draft zone in Ironman racing and all pretty much professional races now, that's really key. So the biking is so important, and it's one of my weaknesses. So I need to do a bit more cycling, and definitely doing 2, maybe sometimes 3 sessions a week. And then the running, again, very similar to the cycling. Before short course, it'd be maybe like a track session, so doing like 2400s hard, and then like another harder maybe build run on a Friday with some shorter runs in the week. Now for Ironman, I'm doing 2-hour long runs. They're going to progress up to 2.5 plus, with some LT1 towards the end, because again, it's all about strength. It doesn't need to be too intense. At the moment I'm doing a bit of VO2 just to build the fitness, but then later on in the season, it's all about strength building, a lot of LT1, longer tempos with a little bit of threshold LT2 in there as well. So again, the run program is much more volume strength-based focus, because for running a marathon you need to just be very strong, whereas if you're running 5 or 10k, it's all about pure speed really, and just high LT1 LT2 threshold. So yeah, slightly changing kind of what you'd think going from a short fast race to a longer slower race. It's just kind of what you'd expect with a change in volume and intensity really, but overall volume hours is basically the same, because I don't think my body would be able to take much more than 30 hours. I'd probably break very, very quickly.
Do you like, again, like sort of relating this to the listeners a little bit, you obviously like came from this like background of speed, you were already fast, now you're obviously focused a bit more on that like sort of strength, endurance, knowing you've got that natural speed. Thinking about people in triathlon that maybe have come to this in adulthood, and we see a lot of people just go straight into the deep end, don't they? 5 to 15 hours worth of racing, and maybe bypass that short course speed and stuff. So, what's your sort of take there on how age groupers need to balance like making sure that they do develop speed over time so that they're quick enough, and then also their target races throughout the year? Is that like maybe like thinking like a multi-year process, or do you just blend it into 1 year?
Yeah, I think VO2 is really important. Like VO2 harder stuff is so important in any program that you're really doing, because VO2 is fitness, and if you've got high VO2, then you've got high capacity to push. You've got good anaerobic capacity. You're generally really fit. That's like the basic thing. If you've got 100, like Christian Blumenfeld, you're 101, you're going to be pretty fit. Whereas if you've got a 40 VO2, you're not going to have great fitness. So I think pushing the VO2 on, especially in like the winter phase, like doing some speed stuff, doing some harder bikes, doing some, high intensity swim sessions that are not too long, but they're short and controllable and manageable in the winter kind of phase, is good, because it keeps training fun, it keeps training motivating, but you also get pretty fit quite quickly off of it. Off of that kind of high intensity interval training, which, HIIT training, as most people kind of summarize it. And I think as well, still having your long runs, your long rides to supplement the VO2 stuff, doing some LT1, again, still builds a strong base, but you're not doing crazy sessions like 4x30 minutes at upper threshold or 6x10 minutes at upper threshold, because it's quite a lot and quite intense. And you get really, really fit, like race fit, and that can not be very sustainable. So if you're really fit in January with that kind of sessions, it might not help you perform maybe in, I don't know, September, August, because it's kind of that training you want to be doing maybe mid-season to really then build on the VO2 that you've got. So I think VO2 is really important in the winter, and obviously topping that up in the summer. But then, as the season progresses, if you want to perform in June, then maybe then, depending on what kind of race it is, if it's an Ironman, for me, I would then, drop a bit of the VO2, and then you start going into, like I said, like, longer bike sessions of like 4x30 LT1, some LT2 stuff, to kind of, you've got that really high VO2 fitness capacity that you feel really good, you feel really fit, and then you can then chuck the threshold on top of that fitness to then build your thresholds off of like a really fit base of a bit of longer aerobic stuff, but a good VO2 capacity as well. And I think it's something I've not really thought about or known too much about until the last couple of years, since speaking to a few other coaches and transferring to long course and listening to podcasts, speaking to other professional athletes, working with Bex around this reverse kind of periodization of doing some VO2 stuff and harder stuff in the winter, which is kind of not really normalized, or, you know, especially when I was younger, it's always like, yeah, long, easy stuff, winter, just about building a base. But actually building a base can also mean getting fit and doing some VO2 capacity stuff too. It doesn't need to be easy. You know, you're building a base of aerobic, but also fitness too. And then when you come to start the race season, you can really go, right, now let's build on top of what we've just done, both bit of VO2 and aerobic. And that's, I think, what, to be honest, a lot of athletes are starting to do, even age groupers, and a lot of coaches are coming in to realize as well. And I've just kind of started to understand this. But again, everyone is different. Everyone's got their own ideas. But yeah, I remember actually about 12 months ago, this time last year, listening to a podcast. Hayden was doing a podcast with someone, and he just started working with Tadej Pogacar's bike coach. And he said it was really interesting because he was doing, like, I remember listening to his bike session. It was like 15 by 15 seconds max within a 2 hour easy ride. And that was like one of his key bike sessions of the week. And I was like, what is that about? That's just like really weird. Like, that's not even like a proper bike session. But this was like in the winter phase. And the idea behind it was just trying to get his power up because he's not very anaerobic. And I was like, yeah, that is quite interesting. And you look at what Hayden's done this year, and he was talking about that reverse periodization of doing more VO2, and he found it very interesting what you know, his bike coach was trying to get him to do in some very different stuff of a lot higher intensity sessions in the kind of off-season winter with aerobic stuff. And yeah, it's definitely something that I think a lot of people have started to do. So that's kind of like, yeah, a bit of a long-winded way to talk about. I'd say VO2 is very important still, and not just going riding 5 hours and doing some threshold and just threshold all the time. You know, you've got to really think about what you're doing, and if you've got a good coach, then they'll definitely help you with that as well.
Yeah, I think it very much aligns with you know, like general thinking these days, and I think the days are just piling a load of mileage. And look, it aligns with how it has to be for amateurs as well. You know, we're probably one of the worst winters any of us can remember in the UK at the moment. So you know, knocking out some VO2 on the turbo for an hour is a lot more appealing than, you know, being outside for another 3 or 4 hours for people. So yeah, you know, it's definitely like a fairly polarized approach. And I think that the lower end base miles are getting difficult. I've actually even got athletes moaning about how hard it is to go out running at the moment. The weather's been so wet. So yeah, you can tell it's been bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
Should
glad
we
to
just
have
move?
missed that. Yeah.
oh, you're out in
Honestly, it's
Australia now. Well, you're out in Lanzarote right now, but you
Well,
recently
Lanzarote,
moved to Australia?
yeah. Yeah, well, my dad lives in Australia, so I've been there with Sophia since November. Then I did Ironman Western Australia, and so did Sophia. And then the plan was to just stay there until end of March, April. So I know I feel
Till
kind
you
of
get
bad
kicked
because
out.
everyone's like, oh, until we get kicked out, exactly when the visa runs out. But yeah, everyone is like, oh, the winter has been horrendous. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's not so good. That's a shame. I don't know what you're talking about. You know, I feel bad because this, you know, that's why we wanted to go to Australia, to be honest, because like you guys have said, it is crazy bad. Like the weather has been awful, it's miserable, and it's hard for training. And yeah, both me and Sophia wanted to really try and take our professionalism to the next level. And you know, my dad lives there, so we, you know, we're well supported over there in Australia. So it's like a second base, a second home, and we just made the decision it makes sense to try and get away, like a lot of professional athletes try to do. You chase the summer all year round, don't you? You don't really want to be training in the snow if you can avoid it. But we're in a very, you know, fortunate position. So yeah, no, I know a lot of people have said the winter's been bad, but I'm glad to have missed it. That's for sure.
I used to have a little thing that I did with myself. At least once a year, you have to go out on a really cold, sub 3 degrees, raining, miserable bike ride where you absolutely hated life. And that, you know, the reason was purely, I think it built that character, it built that resilience. But definitely from a physiological point of view, trying to get the miles in and get proper training done, the the sun's where
It's
it's at, right?
tough. It's tough. Yeah, the sun makes it a lot easier. But getting strong, the UK definitely makes you stronger. Being Scottish, it makes you even tougher. But you did some pretty crazy stuff back in the Stirling days for sure, Grant. I think you've done some long runs at late at night and some crazy cold rides. I don't think I didn't like the crazy cold rides for me. It wasn't so much fun, but it makes you tough, that's for sure. It gives you a strong mindset, and I think a strong mindset is half the battle when it comes to triathlon. So yeah, maybe going for a cold ride at 2 degrees and rain is probably not a bad thing once a year to make you tough.
Um,
Yeah, I did it last week and ended up being in the bin for the week, so it's also it's also not very good for you. So yeah, guys,
Yeah.
let's just so we've just talked about I think what a lot of listeners love to hear about the harder training sessions, the VO2, the how the season looks. Let's talk about probably one of the harder things to sell to the amateur athlete. We're going to talk a little bit about like technique development, skill development, sort of like how that translates to performance. I know you do a bit of work actually from like a run movement point of view, actually, don't you? And thinking about swimming and running together here. You were obviously a um not a very good swimmer when you started, and have moved to like that front pack. And let's get into that now. Like how much of that was just going in the pool and doing hard work, and how much of that was like understanding how to swim?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and there was nothing really super special about going from someone who couldn't swim to someone within 2 or 3 years. I think I swam under 5 minutes by 2014. So within 2 years, I'd gone from thinking I could swim 15 minutes for 400 to under 5 minutes. And the key thing for me was I joined a swim club and I went from swimming 0 hours a week to about 12 plus hours a week, double swim days, 4 hour swim days. The swim club was intense. You were doing all strokes, which I think also is very important. Bit of fly, bit of, backstroke, breaststroke, front crawl, big sets, different stuff, creating like a full package of swimming ability. And I just got thrown in the deep end and it was horrible. To be totally honest, it was not easy. Like, swim clubs are quite intense, especially as a kid. And it made me fit though. I think the key to being a better swimmer is time in the water and feeling the water, understanding like what hip rotation is, how do I catch, what is my coach talking about when he says reach more, or think about reaching over the barrel or high elbow or looking down at the pool. And if you're only doing 1 or 2 swims a week, you're limiting your time to develop and learn and understand what your coach is talking about and practicing that in real time in the water. Whereas if you're doing 12 hours a week and maybe 2 swims a day, that rate of improvement, instead of it being a year, is going to take 2 or 3 months, 4 months. So that was why my rate of improvement went through the roof, but not everyone can swim 12 hours. And I wouldn't recommend doing it either if you're a triathlete because it's way too much. But that was why I got so much faster very, very quickly, because I just allowed my body to get used to the water, the feel of the water. I had a coach on poolside, which I think is also important. If you've got someone on poolside looking at you, giving you tips, maybe sometimes taking a video on top of the water, maybe got a GoPro under the water, looking at that feedback instantly and then trying to, improve that in the water immediately as well is really important. And one thing I also found very helpful, which I used to sometimes do before a time trial, is I'd watch like professional swimmers, like watching someone like Duncan Scott, Michael Phelps, the best swimmers in the world, and looking at their technique and actually visualizing them swimming, looking at the underwater videos of like the Olympics and seeing all their strokes and how they look, and then trying to think about you doing that as well. Actually, I found really, really helped. So watching someone who's a much better swimmer than you, watching them from above, watching them from under the water and seeing what their technique looks like, their hip rotation, their head position, and then trying to think about what is my hip rotation like, my head position. I look like that. Why does he look like that when he's looking down? So for me, there's so many different ways to improve, but time in the water, drills, and having someone to speak to you and correct you on poolside, I think are the best ways, really, from a swim perspective. I don't know what your guys' kind of thoughts are on that as well.
yeah,
Yeah, I think. Oh, yeah, Grant, you go.
no, I was just going to say, I once had a coach put it to me, like, you know, we spend so much time on our feet. Even swimming at the time when I was training 6 times 90 minutes a week in the water, it's still just such a small percentage of our life
Mm.
is in the water. And so, to become a fish, to learn what it's like being in the water is very, very challenging. Are there any common mistakes, I guess, that you see age groupers make when it comes to swimming? I always looked at you as a very kind of technically good swimmer from quite a young age, perhaps quite a kinesthetic learner. Is there anything that you see age groupers, any kind of common mistakes you see them make, and how do you go about trying to get them to improve?
Yeah, I'd say in terms of like actual technical aspects of most age groupers swimming is like there's three things I think that make someone a good swimmer or can make a big difference is hip rotation, head position, and just overall kind of catch, like what's going on with your arms. Because if you're not rotating with your hips, you're just like on a surfboard. I actually used to swim a little bit like that. I think I remember we were on a camp once, Grant, and I remember actually you gave me some advice. I think you're like, you're really, really flat. And I remember thinking after that, yeah, he's right. I swim like this. And I think so hip rotation is so important because if you can rotate more, you actually can you might get like a whole 15 centimeters of extra reach. And then also, if you're crossing over like this, your legs are going to be all over. So, you see a lot of people when they begin to swim, and I was the exact same. You try to think about reaching and catching, but all you're doing is crossing over like this. And that's probably the biggest common mistake is crossing over and not getting enough hip rotation. So you want everything to be straight, like almost like on a train track. I tell people, that's what I used to say as well when I was doing some running technique coaching. You never want to cross over with your feet. You want everything to be straight. Swimming in, straight lines, smooth, with your hips rotated and arms straight out. You don't want to be on a surfboard crossing over because it's just not efficient. It's not going to help you maximize pull through the water. And same with head position. That's the absolute key thing. You see a lot of people, even I still do it, and most professionals, you're looking for the end of the pool. You're looking for someone in the lane. You don't want to swim into someone's feet. You're always constantly looking up. And it's hard to do if you're in public lanes because you can't just always swim your head down because you're probably going to end up swimming into someone or maybe the wall if you're not used to a pool. So having your head down and looking down at the water is really important because the moment for me, if I lift my head up even slightly or I sight in open water, my feet just drag. And you see it's so common with age group swimmers. It's just, a lot of people swim too high with their head, and everyone that sometimes I coach, they go, I really struggle. My feet are dragging. I just can't get things right. It's so difficult. And then I tell them to look down at the pool or even just change their head position slightly, and they can go, 5 seconds per 100 faster because their feet aren't sinking across the floor. So that's like the common mistakes. And I think it's just giving like you said, Grant, giving your time, giving your chance and your body some time to practice the feel for the water because swimming is so different. We're not used to being in the pool. And I am fortunate. I do feel like I understand and know my body quite well. So you get used to what feels right and what doesn't feel right. But for some people, it really is challenging and you just need to give your body time. But swimming is one of those very, very frustrating things. I think a lot of people that do triathlon, they just hate it. It's hard because it's just very, very slow rate of improvement. But yeah, that's my key kind of 3 tips, I'd say: head position, hip rotation, and maximizing catch. And if you can kind of nail those 3 things, you'll be in a good place to then really improve your swimming.
Yeah, I think coach on poolside is all just so critical, and most age groupers don't have an awful lot of chance for that.
Yeah.
But I think trying to find 2 or 3 moments in every year where whether that's a camp or a weekend or a private one-to-one session or a master's club, or that someone's actually thinking about technique rather than just setting the session. So definitely. And I think a lot of what you were saying towards the end there links quite nicely into running. And
Mm.
again, as you sort of put it, Grant, it's a bit more natural because we're on our feet all the time. But I mean, we just ran a run clinic this weekend down in London with the girls Podium that do that with us. And whilst everyone can run, swimming, obviously you start from zero, don't you? You have to actually learn to move through the water, but we can sort of all think we can run. Whereas, what you observe when you go through a clinic is the way people move is incredibly varied. And, a lot of people stand to gain an awful lot if they were to do some work on, how they move as a runner. It's not just about being, the bike is a lot easier, isn't it? In terms of, turn the cranks over, produce power, get aero, go fast, relatively simple. Whereas, running comes under that swimming category a bit more, where there's a lot more biomechanics involved. So yeah, give us your take on the run side of it as well.
Yeah, so yeah, I used to do a lot of running technique specific coach in the gym, and I've got a level 5 master's running technique coach qualification, which I got down in London. So I do have a good bit of knowledge and experience, but you're right, running is very, very different for everyone. Everyone moves completely different. Their movement patterns are very different, and you see people that have had major injuries, surgeries, and their movement patterns are very imbalanced, and that needs to be improved as well to help. But like the biggest thing I think with running is activating the hamstrings, the glutes, that whole kind of posterior movement to try and actually, get things activated to help with your run leg cycle is really key. And I think a lot of people, including myself, overstride. We land on the heel, we use our quads, we get knee issues, we get patella tendon problems, sore hips, sore shins, sore feet, because everything is just out in front, really that high impact. So yeah, just trying to maximize kind of hamstrings and glutes is like the key thing for me, I would say, in doing those strength and activation exercises in the gym, pre-run to help, because that is a lot of the professional runners, they've got such strong glutes and hamstrings and can really switch them on, and that's what allows them to be so quick, because they can use that elasticity of the tendons. And how I've actually helped people in the past improve their running, a really, really simple tip is like going on a treadmill into the gym and holding on to the treadmill like you're on like pushing a trolley around Tesco or Asda, wherever you shop, and holding on to it, and you put the treadmill on like a 3 to 5% gradient, and just think about your leg cycle. So take the arms out of the equation and just try to think about landing in the midfoot, try to think about landing underneath your body, thinking about using the glutes and the hamstrings. And honestly, doing this like 5 to 6 times 20 seconds, it's crazy how much of a difference it makes doing it on a gradient, because it tricks your body to run underneath yourself, because you can't really overstride when you're running up a hill. It doesn't need to be too quick. And then when you take the gradient back down to like 1%, 2%, and you run with your arms and you think about still doing what you were doing whilst holding on to the bar, it's amazing. The difference, it's instant pretty much with a lot of people. They do it for 5, 10 minutes, and then you put it back down on the flat and with their arms and get everything going again, and they feel totally different. So these are just simple techniques to try to trick your brain and change the movement patterns, to just, yeah, you're trying to change what the brain is used to doing with the muscles, get it out of its bad habits. And this is just one simple kind of step to change the leg cycle that I've done with people, and it's really effective, and can change a lot of problems, like change heel strike, change overstride, and improve activation of the hamstrings and glutes. So yeah, quite an easy way, and it's the biggest thing I think to help a lot of people. And obviously with running arms, it's not as complicated. You just need to try and relax your shoulders. A lot of people are very tense, they run like quite crossed over, but doing some standing stuff in the gym. So 1 kilo, literally just 1 kilo, 30 seconds, and just try to think about running straight with your arms, keeping the shoulders relaxed. Just, again, it's all about changing that movement pattern and strengthening the neuromuscular system to try and get things to be more of a habit. But you've got to be consistent with it. You can't just go and say to yourself, I'm going to do it 1 week and go to the gym and get really hyped about improving your technique. It's got to be a plan that's going to be maybe half a year. You've got to stick to it and be patient, because technique development is very slow, but really important as well.
Have you noticed any
and a lot of people just don't have that level of patience, do they? We live in a
No.
world of like, I want it now. So
Yeah,
Grant.
and I'm not that patient either too, so it's difficult.
Have you noticed any changes? So, like, one of the things that we all see when you watch a triathlon race is everybody comes off the bike and they run like they're still sat down. And
Yeah.
you add into that the majority of age groupers, or sat at a desk from 9 till 5, and then they go on the bike and then they run. But perhaps for yourself, you mentioned that your bike volumes went up a good, what, 30%, something like that.
Yeah.
And with that added time on the bike and a kind of closed hip position, have you noticed any changes in your run technique, or is it something that you've tried to prevent deteriorating?
Yeah, it's definitely shortened my hamstrings. My hamstring length has decreased, and my speed and elasticity and like speed of my run had gone down quite a bit. I struggled with hamstring injuries a little bit last year just because everything is so bent over. It's all stretched out. The hamstrings get overused a little bit. So it's definitely something that I've had to work on myself, with that change in position. But yeah, it's just one of those things that I'm trying to address this year, a bit more manual therapy, a bit more mobility, some more VO2 speed stuff to try and help the running program. It's quite important for me really, to improve that kind of whole run program. But yeah, it's definitely been challenging doing a lot more cycling. It's not been easy at all, really, just to try and balance out the run program as well and try and keep the running technique actually feeling smooth.
So summarize, like linking all this together, time crunched amateurs tend to skip the swim drills, don't get looked at properly from a swimming point of view, don't think about form when running, probably skip the gym, and then not thinking about the mobility and things like hamstring length and the effect of being sat at a desk all day, which they do a lot more than you do. And so they're nearly like there's an awful lot of things they could be adding to their program there. The problem is fitting it in a time crunch life.
Yeah.
Even someone training 15 hours a week, I mean, they're still, I think what your message in there, was just be consistent, wasn't it? Do a bit every week of all of those things and do it every week.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of people, especially at the start of the new year, you see it every time. People get very carried away with something that's new. It's very intense for 1 or 2 weeks. They go to the gym maybe every second day. They add in an extra few swims. They've got a new coach. They've got a new nutrition plan. They've got a new goal. And they try to do too much too soon or try and do too much within what is already a busy life. And I mentioned earlier in the podcast about stress. We can only deal with so much stress in a day. And if you try to give your body too much stress, then something is going to have to give, whether it's a burnout, whether it's an injury, illness, something is going to happen because we don't have unlimited ability to deal with stress. Otherwise, we'd all be superhumans and people would be breaking world records everywhere. So, you have to be careful and you have to manage it. And the best bit of advice I can give to anyone is consistency in doing things little and often. You're better off trying to develop your technique, 3 times a week for the whole year, thinking about drills and stuff within swimming, rather than trying to do 6 swims, try to do technique all the time and only doing it for 1 month because it's got too much and you've got bored of it. And then you just stop doing any sort of technique work at all. And it's just that consistency of doing little and often and continuing development, which is something, again, I struggled with injuries and stuff, being consistent because I trained a bit too hard or I did a few silly things and I didn't listen to my body. So just listening to your body as well and keeping consistent training, trying to keep training peaks green and keep a volume and an intensity that is manageable around family, around life, around study, around other work stress, and making sure you get that right with your coach. And don't try to do 20 hours when you're already working 40 hours and you've got 4 kids that need to go to different football, martial arts, swimming classes, because it's just never going to work. So it's balancing around what you've already got and where you can fit things into your busy life as well already.
Yeah. I mean, I can think of a specific example of someone I work with, very successful age group athlete, a lot of good results. And he has just got the right balance of a little bit of swim technique, a little bit of run drills, a little bit of strength. He only does 10 to 11 hours a week because he has to balance it with family and he has to get all of the pillars of his life in order. And because we're successful with that over years, he just keeps developing as an athlete.
Yeah.
rather than like filling every possible minute with more and more hard aerobic training, skipping all of the development stuff, and being absolutely on the limit and no time to recover and chill out a little bit. So yeah, more is more, but more is not always more. Hey, so
Absolutely. Unless you're a professional athlete and you don't have any work or no kids and you've got no wife and you've got no real normal life, then yeah, train 35 hours a week and do all the little bits, go to every training camp you want. But if you're not in that position, which not many people are, then yeah, you have to be sensible. And being sensible will get you good results in the end because then you'll be consistent and you'll continue to enjoy the sport. Whereas yeah, you don't want to burn out and it's very, very easy to do too much too soon. But yeah, it's always hard because everyone wants to train more and we all wish we could train more, but you've got to find your limit at some point, and we can't all just be training 40 hours a week because it's not sustainable.
Looking at your year gone, which was obviously very successful across 70.3, which culminated in your debut Ironman where you walked away with the win, which was really incredible and really, really nice to see. It's qualified you for World Champ 70.3 and the big
Yeah.
one in Kona next year. You just released on Instagram your race schedule for the year. And I looked at it and thought, bloody hell, that's going to be some year. Talk to us a little bit about the thinking behind how you planned that year. And in particular, you've got Ironman Texas, Ironman Frankfurt, 2.5 months apart. What's that
Mhm.
process going to be like in between those two races? Recovery, train, go again?
Yeah, so for me, I know if I have 10 to 12 weeks going into any race that's uninterrupted from injury or illness, I'm 95% of the time, unless there's something else going on, I'll get the best out of myself. If I have a good day and I prepare well the week leading into the race, so that's the thought process behind this year and trying to perform overall in the Pro Series. So, I raced quite late. I did Ironman Western Australia and it was very good. And I had to also give myself a lot of time off because it was my first Ironman. So I was a bit broken for a few weeks. I was tired mentally, physically. And I knew racing before Texas was going to be almost impossible to allow myself to recover, get back into training, which to be honest, I only really feel like I've got back to a good point now. And we're in February, I'm 4 weeks in. And now I've got, maybe once I travel back to Australia, I've got 7 weeks of good training and then, a couple kind of taper weeks. So it's not even loads. So I think racing before Texas was definitely a no-go. And that's why doing that as my first one is quite, that's why I'm doing that as my first one. But doing also an Ironman any later than that would be really difficult. And when you look at the Pro Series, and then the reason, again, having 2.5 months almost between Texas and Frankfurt is again just to recover off of Texas, which will take me, around 10 days to fully recover and feel like I can get back into a lot of good work again. And then again, you've almost got that taper week or 10 days before Frankfurt. So you lose like 3 weeks of good quality training. So then it comes down to just under 2 months of really good training, which again is kind of that optimal around 8 to 10 weeks for me of getting a really good block in to be as fit as possible to then go and hopefully perform as best as I can in Frankfurt. And I think the biggest mistake a lot of people make, and again, if you're doing it for fun, you're not looking to, win loads of prize money and make a living out of the sport and maximize performance, it's not as critical. But if you want to maximize performance, you say you're an age grouper and you've qualified for Kona, give yourself that 10 weeks of really key prep that you need, and then you'll allow yourself to perform well. And I think for me, I've found that's very important. And I've definitely raced a bit too much sometimes, or I've not given myself the recovery and training that I've needed into really key races. And again, like the back end of the year, you've got the 2 world champs, which are going to be a challenge for a lot of people because they're only 4 weeks apart. So, do you focus on Nice? Do you focus on Kona? How do you do that prep around those 2 world championships? For me, I'm going to definitely maximize my prep for Kona, and Nice is go there, try and perform the absolute best you can, but I'm not going to be trying to win Nice and train to win Nice. I'm going to be training to win Kona because that's the key goal for me this year, and that's what's going to allow me the best chance to do well in the Pro Series. And Kona, I feel, is a bigger goal for me than Nice. And I think if you feel you can, as an athlete, go to Nice and win, and go to Kona and win, then absolutely amazing. Like, fair play. I think there's not many athletes in the world that can do that, but I think for most, you kind of are going to have to decide on on what one do you want to really maximize your performance, because they're very close together, and that is a really big challenge for me, and it's going to be a big challenge for a lot of people as well this year. But yeah, we'll kind of see what happens for sure.
Obviously, going to a very hot race at the end of the year. Have you got what's your sort of strategy around the heat and stuff then?
Yeah,
How
so
are you in how
obviously
are you in the heat in general?
Uh, hit or miss, but I'm definitely getting a lot better. Like Western Australia was actually really hot by the end. It was 28 degrees. The UV was 13. The sun was super intense over in Australia. It's crazy, and I feel like I coped with that very well for almost a 7.5, 8 hour race. So I definitely am getting pretty good in the heat for a Scottish person that shouldn't be very good in the heat. My sweat rate isn't crazy, my salt loss isn't crazy, so my body doesn't go into a really bad place. I'm not losing 3 liters an hour and over 1,000 milligrams of salt. So I'm quite lucky from that regard. Even though you want a high sweat rate, if it's too high and your salt concentration is too high, it becomes very, very challenging to stay on top of that. So in that regards, it's okay. But yeah, I think doing this block in Australia where I'm going to, overall, I'm going to be there for around 4.5 months. That's gonna, I feel, will give me a really good base kind of heat adaptation, so that when I come to do any heat stuff later on in the year, my body will quite quickly adapt and go straight into in a good place when it comes to heat training. Whereas if you've never done any heat training before, you need to give yourself time to allow your body to adapt to that. But because hopefully I should be pretty well adapted by the time I get to Texas, that should maintain throughout the most of the year. All I'll need to do is some top ups. So leading into Kona, Loughborough, for those that haven't been, has got an excellent science lab. They've got the chamber. It can go to altitude. It can go cold, hot, humidity, everything. It's a big lab in the Sports Science Institute based there at Loughborough Uni, and they've got this amazing chamber that you can do loads of stuff with. So I'll definitely look to see if I can get in there with the sports scientists and do some really specific training around humidity, because Kona is very humid, which makes it the most challenging part, and do some heat training. So I've definitely got an idea of what I'd like to do. I just need to sit down with Bex, my coach, and a couple other people and work out how can I really maximize yeah, Kona and the heat prep, because it's definitely that's probably the biggest part of the race. The Ironman's half of it, and then the heat is probably the other battle with Kona, as we've seen last year in the women's race. So definitely something that I've started to think about for sure, and how I can prepare for that, because it's a big challenge, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. And just maybe rounding things off with I don't know, you might give a controversial answer here, but there's a big trend on heat training at the moment with age groupers. And look, taking athletes that are going to Kona aside, the general trend for building this into training for the physiological gains. What's your stance on that for the especially when someone is time limited?
Yeah, I think heat training is a tricky one. I've actually never really liked going into the lab and doing really controlled training in the heat, and then reducing my overall training, because I found that the fitter I get, the better I perform. But I think for something like Kona, because it's such a hot race and so humid, you really do need to do specific stuff. But for example, I'm training in Australia, it's 30 plus degrees, 35, but I'm still training my normal volume, but I just need to be really on top of nutrition, hydration, and all of that. So I think if you're an age grouper, you need to have someone that is working with you to really help manage the heat training you're doing, whether that's wearing more clothes when you're running, whether you're going into a lab, and how you maybe adapt your overall intensity, because heat training is really intense, and you won't be able to go and do your normal threshold session in a heat lab, because it's absolutely impossible because of the intensity of wearing more clothes, or working in a hot garage, or if you make like a gym room really hot, you have to be very, very careful. And some people don't work with heat training. A lot of the time in the past, I've overdone the heat training, and I've actually performed very, very badly, because I've well overcooked myself, and it's really easy to do too much heat training and actually impact your performance negatively than positively. And that's why it is something that needs well thought out. You need a good plan in place, and work it around other sessions that you're doing within the week, and how you can make it work to the best of your ability, and just understanding yourself as an athlete, whether you need more, whether you need less, or none at all. Because I've done some hot races, like for example, Western Australia got to 28 degrees for the marathon, which is pretty hot for a Scottish person or even a British person in general in those winter months, coming from, not much heat training at all. I did no heat training, and I had no real issues in the heat. So, then I could argue, well, do you need it? So it's just knowing what works for you and how much you need. It's not always a case of going to the lab for 10 hours a week and that's going to make you a good athlete and good in the heat, because that is absolutely not the case. It's got to be pretty well thought out. Same thing with altitude. Altitude training is risky, and you need to have a good plan and someone to speak to know the best way to approach all this kind of stuff. It's not just a case of let's go to Font Romeu for 4 weeks and train hard, because something bad's probably going to happen. So it's just, knowing the environment you're working in and maximizing it to the kind of athlete you are as well.
Will you be using any altitude training this year?
I've never ever trained at altitude, which is interesting, probably to some people to hear that. I've just never gone to an altitude training camp. I've never been in a center where altitude training camps have been a thing. And I've never used it as a training tool, like sleeping in altitude or using it in the lab, but it's definitely something that could be useful for me. I would need to, again, speak to sports scientists, speak to doctors, speak to coach, and see if it's something that could help me as an athlete, because I'd have no idea how I would respond. That could be amazing and the best thing I've ever done. Or again, it could be the worst thing that I ever do, and maybe I perform really badly. And it's so risky. You see some people doing altitude, they come down and they race crap, really, really bad. And some people fly. I don't know what your experience. I know you've done some stuff, Grant, at altitude, and I don't know how you found it, but I have no experience with altitude. So, but I know it's risky. That's all.
Listen, I didn't do it a lot. Did I notice much? I don't think I noticed much difference, to be honest with you. But I always didn't notice much difference up there.
Yeah.
With training, like I just felt okay to me. I think it's something that isn't actually spoken about as much as maybe it was 5 years ago or so, where everybody seemed to be going to the whatever destination to get some altitude. It doesn't seem to be spoken about quite as much anymore, which is interesting for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did a bit of it maybe 6-7 years ago. I did 2 summers, one in Saint Moritz and one in Alpe d'Huez, and definitely 2 very different responses if you get it right and if you get it wrong, put it that way. So I went and had a 70.3 worlds that went very well and a 70.3 worlds that I might as well have not bothered showing up. So it's it definitely. I think it's like back to what you just said about the heat training. It's about taking the right advice, thinking about how it fits into the whole picture of the year, and understand. I think that there's a tendency with the heat stuff, because it can be done at home, that it's sort of thrown in as, oh, everyone's doing that, I'll throw a bit of that in as well, rather than thinking about timing, the stress, the additional stress of doing it. And I think people just need to understand it fully before they dive in with it, really.
Absolutely. And there's so many things like you need to have your hydration strategy to an absolute key when you're doing heat training. You can't just not be taking electrolytes and not drinking enough, because if you just neglect that, then you can forget about the adaptations and the ability to perform on a weekly basis when you're doing heat training. It's like, I remember speaking to someone about altitude, and again, I didn't even know about this because I have no experience with altitude, but I remember someone saying, if you're not supplementing with iron tablets or, ferrous sulfate, or, making sure your iron level is high when you go to altitude, then you might as well not go to altitude, because you're really limiting your ability in the hemoglobin and all the effects you want from altitude training to actually take place if your iron levels are super low. So all of these things you have to think about, with the heat training and hydrating and getting it right and knowing what you need to do as an athlete. So it's not just a case of, going into a really hot bath or wearing loads of clothes on all your training sessions. Definitely speak to someone before you dive into something different, that's for sure, because if you don't, then you're probably going to do something wrong, rather than have a positive experience out the back of it.
Yeah, Cam, look, it's been brilliant having you on. I think what you've done there really nicely is like, there's something for every ability of triathlon to listen to in there, right from that person getting into it and understanding like how much you can truly progress, right through to that last discussion there, which is probably pretty high level for those sort of pushing the limits and looking for those marginal gains. So yeah, thanks so much. It's been really good listening to you.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, guys, for having me on. And I mean, it's good to chat around like my experience in triathlon, but also more on a coaching level too. Because a lot of times doing these podcasts, it's more about me as an athlete or talking about my experience as a professional athlete. But it's good to kind of chat more around the coaching level stuff too, and hopefully give some people listening some advice, and hopefully everyone's learned something new as well that they can take away and improve at home. So yeah, no, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Cam.
Been
Awesome.
great.
Yeah, been a while.
Yeah, cheers.